Welcome everybody. Let's start with a couple of announcements. So you've just turned in homework number 10, and I hope that you got my email yesterday that the last assignment that was initially assigned on that is going to be shifted to the homework that's due on Friday. So today in class we're going to talk about cost effectiveness analysis. I noticed that some of you submitted the assignment before I sent out the message, and you probably were able to figure out cost effectiveness analysis on your own. It's not particularly complicated, but if you did, then I'll just ask the grader to transfer those points over to the next assignment. Please also include your solution in homework 11 just to make sure that that it's not gone missing. A week from today is the in-class administration of exam number 2. And as I mentioned in class on Wednesday, there's also an option to take that exam early if you like. I'm going to be handing around a sign-up sheet for that, and so you have two choices. You can take the exam 1 week from today in class during our normal time, or you can take it on Thursday, the 21st of March. And I haven't yet set a location for that. It's going to depend partly on how many people sign up. So I'm going to send that by, and if you're not exactly sure yet, if you still need to decide, then you can still on Monday make the choice. But you do need to kind of declare your intentions. Only sign up if you're taking it on Thursday, if you're opting for the early choice. I mentioned previously that the exam will have two parts, some concept questions where you're just going to be writing from your memory, and you won't be able to access the formula sheet that you prepare for the exam. I'm going to provide a formula sheet and factor tables as needed for the exam, and so the equation sheet that I'm going to provide will be these equations, just the interest rate factor table equations. And also, where needed, provide factor tables. And so what should go on your page of notes would be any other equations that you've used since the first midterm exam that you need to solve problems of the type that you've solved since that exam. So you've got the in-class exercises, you've got your homework assignments, you know which equations and which methods you've applied since the first exam. You should be prepared to apply those same methods and formulas on the test. So that's the purpose of the one page of notes. And you can fill both the front and back side of the paper with whatever you like. It can be equations, it can be procedure outlines, it can be reminders on how to format a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet if you want to list what all of the column titles ought to be. So it's entirely up to you. I don't have any preferences. You can handwrite it or type it as you choose. Are there other questions about the exam? Please be sure to bring a computer. It won't be good enough to bring your phone. I wouldn't let you use your phone anyway, but you need to have an actual laptop computer with a functioning internet access and the ability to use Microsoft Excel for the exam. Any other questions about the announcements before we start talking about cost effectiveness analysis? Okay, I already showed you that. Has anybody noticed that occasionally there are intersections that have cameras above them? Have you seen that before? They're starting to put some of them up in Huntington. They do it for a lot of different reasons. For one, they can use them to manage when the lights signal, and so they can use image processing to know if someone's waiting at one intersection, and then it would trigger the cycle that will eventually lead to them having the green light in their direction. In some places, they're starting to use them for traffic enforcement as well. And so you can see from the diagram here, if you're trying to catch someone who runs a red light, then you need to have the camera set up so that when it's red and someone is in this detection zone, it takes a picture to prove that the light was red when before they got in the intersection. And then it takes a second picture when they're in the intersection and it's red. And so that would be kind of proof of a violation. And I think that cameras like this would be, like for law enforcement and to limit red light running would be a really welcome addition. That seems to be a bad habit that we drivers in this area have, is running through red lights. I mean, it's really dangerous. But it's difficult to know whether this system is cost effective and how to compare it to other options for enforcing the laws. Because, traffic cameras like this aren't the only alternative. You could have a police officer actually at the intersection 24 hours a day, waiting in a car to drive and chase down someone who's run a red light. You probably already have an inkling that that could be more expensive over the long term, because although you'd avoid the upfront cost of installing the camera and the flash and the computerized controller, now you're having to pay for the wages of a person to actually be there. But then there are other ways to enforce laws as well. Thank you. So did everybody who wanted to sign this get the opportunity today? I'll have it with me again on Monday. So the point is, think about what we've done so far. We had the part of the course where we were talking about revenue alternatives. So that's where we were calculating rates of return and calculating net present value. Positive present worths would be an indicator that a project is acceptable. But now we've moved on to a different phase where we're considering alternatives that may not be profitable. The idea from class, the last two lectures, benefit cost analysis, was trying to compare not just the financial advantages of a project, but trying to look at more holistically what is the benefit to society in terms of improvement of life, and then subtracting out the disadvantages. And the challenge with that was, of course, turning things that aren't necessarily related to dollars into a dollar equivalent. What we're learning about today is cost effectiveness analysis, and it's kind of somewhere in the middle. It's just another tool that we have to make decisions. And when I say in the middle, what I mean is it can be used on projects where you're generating some sort of income from it, but it can also be applied on projects where there isn't necessarily any revenue that's being generated. The advantage with cost effectiveness analysis is just in its simplicity. You're essentially looking at the operation of different alternatives and trying to pick the one that is doing the most for the least amount of money. So it's often applied to service sector projects. And by service sector, what we mean is it's distinguished from manufacturing, it's distinguished from public works, where you're building a thing that can be measured and quantified, like a bridge or a sewer system. Service sector is providing intangibles, and it's often the output of people for other people, where what you're paying for isn't something that you could put in a bag, but you're paying for services. In the public sector, the types of human services that people consume are healthcare, accounting services, law enforcement, safety training, and so on. Another one of the reasons why we want to add this analysis method to our toolbox is that there can be some projects where the benefits are especially difficult to estimate. There are people whose jobs it is to try and translate benefits into a dollar equivalent. But sometimes the steps between the benefits and some dollar equivalent, there's just so much uncertainty that any attempt to monetize it is just basically speculation. So in the case of traffic cameras, maybe it would be easy to identify the cost, but what about how would you identify the benefits? You'd have to start speculating about how many fewer accidents there are. You'd have to start speculating about the avoided damage to vehicles, and it's tough to prove something that didn't happen. To say what's the value of an incident that's avoided is especially difficult to quantify. So rather than trying to do that, rather than going out on a limb and just kind of extrapolating what the benefits of traffic cameras might be, another approach would be to just look at the cost and compare alternatives on the basis of their cost and what is the job that they're actually trying to do. Now there are, of course, benefits to traffic cameras. Here's a list of some of the benefits of having them. But, you know, how would you turn the dollar benefit of police being able to focus on other types of law enforcement? You know, when you take an officer who otherwise would be writing traffic tickets, and now that same officer is able to patrol the neighborhood more often. It's tough to say the dollar value of that. So this cost effectiveness analysis is just another tool. And the formula that we use for applying it is you find the cost of operating a particular alternative, and then you have to find some measure of effectiveness. And here's the difference between this and benefit cost is in benefit cost you're trying to monetize effectiveness. Here you don't have to. The measure of effectiveness could be anything. It doesn't have to be in terms of dollars. It could be in terms of tickets written, passport applications processed. What we're going to look at today is poachers arrested. It can be any kind of work activity. And think about the types of things that are listed here: safety training, accounting, healthcare. And so you can more directly measure the expense of providing a different service according to the effectiveness measure. So that's the volume of work that's being produced. So here's an illustration. What if there are 4 different offices that are processing passport applications? How many people here have a passport? So that's less than half. Everybody else needs to get a passport so you can go somewhere exciting next spring break. It's probably too late for this spring break, but next spring break you should make like a promise to yourself that you're going to go down to Mexico and get wild or something, you know? Or go up to Canada and get cold. All right, so get a passport. It's worth it. Let's just take as an illustration here, what if there's 4 different offices and they have different operation costs? Now, it could be related to the wages of the people that work in each office. It could be related to the rent in each office. All we know is that for every hour that they're open, each one of these offices have a different operational expense. Now, they aren't even necessarily the same size. It could be that Office C has a lot more employees than Office D. And that's okay. We can account for differences in size. Kind of, it's implicit in the equation because what we're looking at is their effectiveness. The main thing that you want out of an office that processes passport applications is how many applications per month are they processing. Now that's maybe the main thing you want, but it's not the only thing you want. Presumably these people are having to be on the lookout for fraud, or maybe one of the offices gets the more complicated applications where maybe the circumstances are less clear. So one thing I want to mention is that when you do cost effectiveness analysis, you always have to remember what are the other factors that aren't being taken into account, because it's easy to game the statistics if you want to. You know, this Office C, maybe they're just approving every single thing that comes through and they're not actually doing the screening and the security background checks that they ought to. So I guess the reason I pointed out is this is an important tool for seeing how effective different agencies and different alternatives are being. But you need to be aware of what are the incentives. You know, if people know that they're going to be measured this way, what shortcuts could they be taking? And so you need to be on the lookout for those shortcuts. All right, so anyways, we've got costs and effectiveness, and so we've calculated a ratio. What this C to E is we're trying to figure out how many, just divide the C by the E. And so the units here would be a little bit strange. The units are going to be dollars per hour divided by applications per month. So we can, if we want to, find out how many hours the office is open in a month, and we could actually find out the cost of processing every application. But that's not necessarily what this is, and the units don't have to make sense in order for us to compare on a relative basis. You know, on a relative basis, what we can see is we want to have the lowest cost per effectiveness. And so the office that's doing the best here looks like Office B. Office B is doing the best, and Office D is doing the worst. Because when you compare the costs to their effectiveness, they have the highest cost per measure of effectiveness. And as long as the units are the same for each row, then it's okay that we haven't yet found out necessarily the total cost of operations. Although we can, and sometimes we will, find out like the actual dollars per application. But here that's not necessarily what that is. Now, what we've done here is we have sorted it. I've sorted so we have the most efficient at the top of the list. And the reason why is that sometimes we can use cost effectiveness analysis to tell us if you've got a limited budget, who's your priority? Like which office should you keep open? You know, maybe there's budget cuts and you're having to look at which office should be closed first. And so we've prioritized the list, and at the top of the list we want to have the most efficient organization, and you'll notice so B, A, C, D, that's in increasing order of cost. And so the cumulative operating cost is saying if you have just Office B open, it's $450 per hour. But now look, if you have B and A open, then the cumulative cost to have both of them open is $1325 per hour. And so this column 5 you get by adding the operation cost of the row that you're on with the cumulative cost from the cell above. So in other words, 3075 is 2425 plus 650. Capital rationing is the phrase that we use to describe what if there is a limited budget. And so in this example, if you're told that you only have $1,600 per hour to spend, then your decision would be to open Office B and A, but not to operate Office C and D. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so I'd like you to get some practice with this. You don't necessarily have to do it on the computer. There are some things that you really do need Excel to solve, other things where it just will speed up your calculations. That's today. It'll speed up your calculations if you use Excel, but you can do this one by hand if you choose. So it's up to you. I'll point out that it's been a while since I collected an in-class exercise from you, and today is one of the days where I will. So there's a blank at the top of the page for you to write your name, and I'm going to set the chair over by the door so that before you leave, please submit the in-class exercise on top of the chair before you go. Yep.
And the test is going to be, you said, two parts. So one part is going to be just writing the definitions from our home, and one will be Excel.
Exactly. Yep, that's
How many
right.
programs in Excel?
I don't know. I haven't written the test yet, so I can't say. But there's only 50 minutes available, so I have to make it pretty short.